Okay.
Olson's, how are things going?
Fine.
Fine.
Fine. Doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. That's an interesting angle.
So we got 2 Kings 5, chapter 5 through what?
Oh, 6. We got through chapter 5.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we
6.
did 5 last week.
Yeah,
Yeah, 6 through 10. We'll take it 5 at a
6
5 at a
through
week.
10. All right. This is for the purposes of the viewer eventually. Yeah.
Oh, yes. For the purposes of my broad and expectant audience. Yes,
Yeah.
this is
I hope so. I really do.
well, I know Donna and Ron are catching up, maybe as we speak with last week's edition. She called me earlier and found out they were on YouTube.
Oh,
And,
great.
It's nice.
So they're getting. I hope she gives me feedback tomorrow at council meeting, and I hope it's good feedback.
Yeah.
I'm going to go grab my Bible since I can now, since Kari's out of the office. I'm going to read that.
Yeah, I just ran back and got ours.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, so I was brushing up on these chapters earlier today between periods. Last week, had Monday off. It was, as I like to call it, Indigenous Italian Explorers Day. So last week I was a little less tired than I am this week because I had a full day of school. And contrary to perhaps popular belief, kids are awful on Mondays. They're never tired on Mondays. They're tired on Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
They
But
had
Mondays and
extra
Fridays are
candy on the weekend.
Yeah. They don't get any sleep on Sunday night, but still they're totally wired on Mondays. And then Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays you can get some teaching done. Monday and Fridays is babysitting basically.
Yeah. Friday for the weekend again.
I'm
Indeed.
not sure it changes that much when you teach college either.
Well, the only difference is they can just not show up.
Yes.
Yeah.
In college.
Happens quite often.
I was so innocent when I went to college as a undergrad. I went to Concordia River Forest, and back when it was Concordia River Forest instead of Concordia Chicago, which I always thought was funny. They didn't move; they just changed the name. But the first week I was there, I overslept for an 8 a.m. English class that required modes of composition or something like that. I think it was called, and I was so petrified that I'd get in trouble for missing this college class that I wrote my professor an apologetic email. Right. By the second semester, I was just skipping classes left and right. I realized, this is different. This is not high school
What you
anymore.
do when it gets easier, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's like riding a bike. Once you get used to not going to class, it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one story.
Sure, please.
And I have used this a couple of times in my own classes over the years. But I was taking a math class, some calculus or differential equations or something like that, and it was in the spring semester, and it was right after lunch, which is never a good time. I don't know when the good time is, but it's not right after lunch. But anyways, it came to class, and there was significantly less than half of the class there, shall we say. And the instructor was obviously pissed. And so he looked at the class and he said, okay, we're going to have a pop quiz. Take out a piece of paper. And of course, we all groaned. And then he said, put your name on it. The answer to the first question is George Washington. Turn it in.
That's perfect.
It's perfect. People didn't cut his classes much after that.
That's great. All right, so I was reviewing these chapters earlier today, and I realized that in case we thought that last week's readings were too lighthearted, it's definitely going to be corrected this week as like a lot of mean stuff happens here. First of all, let me share the screen real quick, as I found something a little helpful today that I'm just going to throw up.
I think I need to make you
I can do it. It says I can do it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But I've also made you co-host.
All right. 1 sec. See if this works. If I take the time to do this right the first time, I won't have to make a joke about doing it wrong later. There we go. Share screen. And there's that one. See if that works. Nope, of course not. All right, stop share. Put that up. Okay. Now. Okay, cool. That'll work. All right, so what we got here
Whoa.
is a handy chart of that breaks down into 2 columns: who's who and where we are. And this site, it's got some sort of like silly name. Oh, conformingtojesus.com. I guess it's not silly, but strange. And I don't know anything about them or what they're about, but I found this as I was Googling around for something that looked like this. And I thought this was very handy. They even, the little shading color coding here is even they managed to put good, bad, and mixture of good and bad here at the bottom. And you'll see that the bad is the light colored, and you'll see that there's a lot more of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. But we're actually still pretty far up here in the kings of Israel. So a lot of these are that we're talking about here today are the descendants of Ahab, who was like a really bad one, right? Really, really bad one. You can tell because in all those readings up until Ahab, when the king was bad, they would say, and they didn't walk with the Lord. He walked in the traditions or the style of Jeroboam, right? And the sins that Jeroboam caused him to commit. But after Ahab, they switch it over, and now it's the sins that Ahab caused him, and like all the other bad ones get compared with Ahab, right? He was the worst it could be. But I think we're at Jehoram, was who we were at, who we got to last week. So Ahab, then Ahaziah, and then Jehoram or Joram, of the king of Israel there in the north, and in the south, we're still up right underneath Jehoshaphat there at Jehoram, the other Jehoram, and Ahaziah, who's going to die here. So that gets a bit confusing. But if you just kind of like poke your head down over what's coming up, you see a couple of overthrows that are going to happen. And we know we're in for some interesting adventures. So here we go. I'll put this full screen. 1 second. There we go. Y'all see that?
Yeah.
All right. So start at chapter 6 here, 2 Kings. This is one of the so Elisha's already, God's already raised someone through the dead through Elisha. And Elisha's already parted waters and walked over him. And he's done a whole lot of really amazing things. So this one seems sort of minor league in comparison, but nonetheless, let's see here. Chapter 6. The company of the prophets said to Elisha, "Look, the place where we meet with you is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan where each of us can get a pole, and let us build a place there for us to live." In the Catholic tradition, I read it, translation I read at school, it was just a tree. Let's all cut down our own tree. And he said, "Go." Then one of them said, "Won't you please come with your servants?" "I will," Elisha said, and he went with them. They went to the Jordan and began to cut down trees. As one of them was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water. "Oh, my Lord," he cried out, "it was borrowed." I could see that'd be a pretty big deal. Like iron axe heads would be a pretty prized possession, I would think, at the time. Yeah. The man of God asked, "Where did it fall?" When he showed him the place, Elisha cut a stick and threw it there and made the iron float. "Lift it out," he said. Then the man reached out his hand and took it. So he's floating iron here, just like the Union Army did in 1862. All right. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, "I will set up my camp in such and such a place." The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, "Beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there." So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king, so he was on guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram, as you might imagine it would. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, will you not tell me which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? The other translation I read was like even more direct. It said, who's the traitor? Basically. None of us, my lord the king, said one of his officers in 12 here. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go, find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back. He is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out, that would be Gizrael, can't remember his name. It was the guy who tried to get the money at the last moment last week. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh, my Lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes. He looked out and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. 18. As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike these people with blindness. Strike these people with blindness. So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, this is not the road. This is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for. And he led them straight to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there they were, inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them? Do not kill them, which is actually an unexpected answer as far as I was concerned. I was actually kind of pleased that the answer was do not kill them. I thought that's a nice change of pace. Do not kill them, he answered. Would you kill men you have captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so they may eat and drink and go back to their master. So he prepared a great feast for them. And after I had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master, and it worked. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territories. Hey, Elisha stopped it without having to resort to violence that time. That's great. But the king of Aram is still none too pleased. So sometime later, the king of Aram, his name is Ben-Hadad, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. There was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. I'm just going to take it for granted that that's very little food for a whole lot of money. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried to him, help me, my lord the king. The king replied, if the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor? From the winepress? Then he asked her, what's the matter? What's the matter anyway? She answered, this woman said to me, give up your son so we may eat him tomorrow, and tomorrow we'll eat my son. So we cooked my son and ate him, or boiled him is the translation I read earlier. The next day I said to her, give up your son so we may eat him, but she had hidden him. When the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked, and there underneath he had sackcloth on his body. He said, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, that great curse formula, if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today. See, he knows who's to blame for all this, right? It's definitely Elisha's fault somehow. Now, Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a messenger ahead, but before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, don't you see how this murderer is sending someone to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him? He's coming right behind. While he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him, and the king said, this disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait? Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? So this is the Lord's fault in the first place. Why should I wait for him to redeem us? And the chapter skips, changes right in the middle of the story here. So, 1 second here. Okay. And Elisha replied, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gates of Samaria. Now, I take it for granted that's a lot of food for a little bit of money. The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heavens, could this happen? You will see it with your own eyes, answered Elisha, but you will not eat any of it. Ye of little faith. Now, verse 3. There were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, if we say we'll get into the city, well, the famine is there, and we will die. If we stay here, we will die. Let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die. So basically, we're dead 3 out of 4 possibilities. Let's go over there anyway. It's our best chance. At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittites and the Egyptian kings to attack us. So they got up and fled. They fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and their donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. Then the men with leprosy reached the edge of the camp and entered one of the tents. They ate and drank and carried away silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. Then they returned, entered another tent, and took some things from it and hid them also. And then they get a pang of conscience. Verse 9. Then they said to each other, we are not doing right here. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace. So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, we went into the Aramean camp, and not a man was there, not a sound of anyone. Tethered horses and donkeys, the tents left just as they were. The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. The king got up in the night and said to his officers, I will tell you, because he don't believe this, I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us, those rascally devils. They know we are starving, so that they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city. But one of his officers answered, have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all the Israelites who are left who are doomed. Let us send them to find out what happened. So they selected 2 chariots. 1 second, make sure. Yeah. So they selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, go and find out what has happened. They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with the clothing and equipment the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. Also reminds me of the Union Army. So the messengers returned and reported it to the king. Then the people, this is great. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said. Hey, but what about that guy who didn't believe? Is he going to get his? Wait and see. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate, and the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold when the king came down to his house. So in their mad rush to get out to plunder the Arameans, they trampled this poor guy like it was Christmas Eve and he had Cabbage Patch Kids in 1985. It happened as the man of God had said to the king. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel. 19. Oh, actually, all this does here at the end here is simply restate why this guy died. The officer had said to the man of God, this is not going to happen. And there he is, verse 20. And that is exactly what happened to him. For the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died. So Elisha is a pretty powerful dude, and pretty right with the Lord. He's got
Just pretty right.
yeah. He's he's got a real talent for realizing hallucinations in other people's eyes. Like these miracles that he performs here, like making people see things that aren't there and hear things that aren't there. Slightly, I don't want to say it's unique, but it's a different kind of miracle than I'm used to seeing. And they say they're like to fool people's like senses in this way is a little different. So we get a return here in chapter 8 of a character from earlier, which is nice because a lot of times these people seem to disappear and you never know what happened to them. But we might recall that the Shunammite lady was the one whose son Elisha restored to life, using the same method that Elijah had used with the prostrating himself on top of the boy 3 times and breathing into him. So she gets a second visit. Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, "Go with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years." The woman proceeded to do as the man of God had said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. Hope they got a nice like beachfront property there because that's right along the coast. At the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land of the Philistines and went to the king to beg for her house and land. The king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, "Tell me about all the great things Elisha has done." Just as Gehazi was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, the woman whose son Elisha had brought back to life came to beg the king for her house and land. Gehazi said, "This is the woman, my lord, the king, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life." The king asked the woman about it, and she told him. Then he assigned an official to her case and said to him, "Give back everything that belonged to her, including all the income from her land from the day she left the country until now." So it's a happy ending for her, which was nice because, like, honestly, the first time I read this, when I saw that, that she had returned and she went up to the king, I was like, uh-oh. You just you just almost expect something bad's going to happen. Like this poor woman, she's been through so much already. But no, good news. Now we get a new character who's pretty important. Elisha went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, was ill. When the king was told, "The man of God has come all the way up here." 1 second here, I'll move this up here. When the king was told, "The man of God has come all the way up here," he said to Hazael, "Take a gift with you and go to meet the man of God. Consult the Lord through him. Ask him, will I recover from this illness?" Hazael went to meet Elisha, taking with him 40 camel loads of all the finest wares of Damascus. He went in and stood before him and said, "Your son Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, has sent me to ask, will I recover from this illness?" Elisha answered, "Go and say to him, you will certainly recover. But the Lord has revealed to me that he will in fact die." Then he stared at him with a fixed gaze until Hazael felt ashamed. The other translation I read earlier today said uneasy. Like he just stared, like he was staring through him. Right? Then the man of God began to weep. "Why is my Lord weeping?" asked Hazael. "Because I know the harm you will do the Israelites," he answered. "You will set fire to their fortified places, kill their young men with their sword, dash their little children to the ground, and rip open their pregnant women." Hazael said, "How could your servant, a mere dog, accomplish such a feat?" "The Lord has shown me that you will become king of Aram," answered Elisha. Then Hazael left Elisha and returned to his master. When Ben-Hadad asked, "What did Elisha say to you?" Hazael replied, "He told me that you would certainly recover." But the next day, he took a thick cloth, soaked it in water, and spread it over the king's face so that he died. Then Hazael succeeded him as king. So he waterboarded him, and that's the end of Ben-Hadad.
Wow.
Yeah. So that must have been just real quick here. I like to look at you guys sometimes. I like to let you guys look at each other.
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine that scene. Right. This guy is just the servant. You wonder if he had a plot in mind, right, beforehand, or if Elisha, in telling him what was going to happen, put that idea there.
Yeah.
Like laid it there. But I can picture the scene of Elisha just staring through him and then starting to cry, and like the uneasiness. That one translation I said read, it's like you felt uneasy, like awkward, as the kids would say, right? And well, he follows through with it though.
Yeah. So I guess that first reading is what I guess how I hear it, but it's difficult to know that Hazael had a plot that was already underway. And maybe the fact that Elisha said he's going to recover just accelerated it. It's like, oh, I guess I better go ahead and kill this guy because he's going to get better.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense, especially because you if you're going to overthrow the king and you're in the court and you're going to do a coup, you're going to form a coup, you got to have conspirators.
Yeah.
You have to have a shadow structure that's ready to come in and be the new structure. Right.
Right.
So, and we've already seen that with back in First Kings with a couple of different guys, a couple of different army leaders, Baasha, and earlier than that, can't remember his name now, with a J, both of whom overthrew the king, but they had already gone about and
Right.
and kind of sounded people out on the idea.
Catherine the Great of Russia, same.
Indeed.
Thing.
Yeah. The Russians are good at that. So, but that's the king of Aram anyway, so he doesn't actually fit directly into our chronology that I showed you earlier because he's not part of either of those kingdoms. What happened to my oh, there it is. Go back to that. Okay. Verse 16. In the 5th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, began his reign as king of Judah. So that means a co-reign or a co-regency there for at least a little while, because Jehoshaphat's not dead, but his son is also king simultaneously, so they're acting as co-regents. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. Okay, let me see this. So he was he married a daughter from the other kingdom. So it's a little bit of a political thing going on here. They actually, like, the royal houses intermarried.
Are you on verse 16 of chapter 8?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we have the king of Judah marrying a daughter of the old king of Israel. So there's a little bit of political intermarriage there. 18. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, for the sake of his servant David, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah. He had promised to maintain a lamp for David and his descendants forever. It's been a while since we were reminded of that, so it's a good time for the prophet to stick that in. In the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. Remember, last week, Edom had been involved as the territory through which Judah had marched to get at Moab, right? And the Moabite king tried to get Edom into revolt at the end, but it didn't work. Well, now it worked. Edom is in rebellion. So Jehoram, also known as Joram, which makes this which is complicated, went to Zaire with all his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through by night. His army, however, fled back home. To this day, Edom has been in rebellion against Judah. Libnah revolted at the same time. I got to find a text note here because I have no idea where that is. Libnah, it says here, Libnah appears to have been located close to the Philistine border. It is likely that the revolt of Libnah was connected with that of the Philistines and Arabs described in 2 Chronicles, etc. So that's detailed elsewhere, in other words. Verse 23. And it's just, and then there's the regular formula that ended up. As for the other events of Jehoram's reign and all he did, are they not written about, etc., etc. He died, he's buried, and Ahaziah, his son, succeeds him as king. 25. In the 12th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began to reign. At least now the kings have two different names, which makes it a little bit easier, because when they're both Joram, it's a little tough to follow. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother's name was Athaliah, a granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. He walked in the ways of the house of Ahab and did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as the house of Ahab had done, for he was related by marriage to Ahab's family. Ahaziah went with Joram, son of Ahab, to war against Hazael, king of Aram, at Ramoth Gilead. So here's our Hazael from a little while ago. The Arameans wounded Joram, so King Joram returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds that Arameans had inflicted on him at Ramoth in battle with the king of Aram. Then Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to Jezreel to see Joram, son of Ahab, because he had been wounded. So the kings seem to have a closer relationship. The political entities of Israel and Judah seem to have a closer relationship now because the houses have been intermarried. So we got extended family in the royal family. So they're hanging out anyway. If it doesn't actually say they're fighting alongside each other, they're at least hanging out. All right, chapter 9. Jehu, a big deal. Prophet Elisha summoned a man from the company of the prophets and said to him, tuck your cloak into your belt, which always means you're going to be running fast. Whenever the expression is tuck your cloak into your belt, it's speech don't fail me now time. So tuck your cloak into your belt, take this flask of oil with you and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you get there, look for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. So Jehu is of the royal line. He's just not the eldest son, or I don't know where he'd fall in the order of succession, but he's another son of Jehoshaphat. So he's not a total, so his usurpation is not going to be like from outside the family. Go to him, get him away from his companions and take him into an inner room. Then take the flask and pour the oil on his head and declare, this is what the Lord says. I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and run. Don't delay. Verse 4. So the young man, the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. When he arrived, he found the army officers sitting together. I have a message for you, commander, he said. For which of us? Asked Jehu. For you, commander, he replied. Jehu got up and went into the house. Then the prophet poured the oil on Jehu's head and declared, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab, your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and no one will bury her. Then he opened the door and ran. Verse 11. Jehu, playing it cool, went out to his fellow officers. One of them asked him, is everything all right? Why did this man come to you? What does this crazy guy want? You know the man and the sort of things he says, Jehu replied. That's not true, they said. Tell us, what's up? Jehu said, this is what he told me. This is what the Lord says. I anoint you king over Israel. Their reaction is telling. They hurried and took their cloaks and spread them under him on the bare steps. Then they blew the trumpet and shouted, Jehu is king. They're not too happy with Ahaziah anyway. So Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now there's a long parenthetical here. Now Joram and all Israel had been defending Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Aram. But King Joram had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds the Arameans had inflicted on him in the battle with Hazael, king of Aram. End parenthetical. Jehu said, if this is the way you feel, don't let anyone slip out of the city and go and tell this news in Jezreel. Then he got into his chariot and rode to Jezreel because Joram was resting there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had gone down to see him. 2 birds, 1 stone. Verse 17. Let me move this up here. 17. When the lookout, standing on the tower in Jezreel, saw Jehu's troops approaching, he called out, I see some troops coming. Get a horseman, Joram ordered. Send him to meet them and ask, do you come in peace? The horseman rode off to meet Jehu and said, this is what the king says. Do you come in peace? What do you have to do with peace? Jehu replied. Fall in behind me. The other translation I read has Jehu saying, what difference does it make to you? Get behind me. So that happens, and the lookout reports the messenger has reached them, but he isn't coming back. It's probably not a good sign. So the king sent out his second horseman. When he came to them, he said, this is what the king says. Did you come in peace? Jehu replied, what do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me. And the lookout reported, he has reached them, but he isn't coming back either. The driving, the chariot driving, is like that of Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a madman. I think we all know some people like that with a chariot. Hitch up my chariot, Joram ordered. And when it was hitched up, Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, rode out, each in his own chariot, to meet Jehu. They met him. This is great. This is like great symmetry, great symbolism. They met him at the plot of ground that had belonged to Naboth, the Jezreelite. Do we recall that? That's back in 1 Kings. That was the when Ahab really wanted a vineyard, right? And he wanted to buy it from Naboth. But Naboth was like, me, give up my inheritance? Nah, the Lord forbid. So Jezebel had conspired against him and got him killed and took the vineyard and gave it to him as a present because Ahab was moping around, lying around pouting. All right, so this is where they end up. They met him at the plot of ground that had belonged to Naboth, the Jezreelite. When Joram saw Jehu, he asked, have you come in peace, Jehu? How can there be peace? Jehu replied, as long as all the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel abound. 24. Then Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart and he slumped down in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar, his chariot officer, Pick him up and throw him on the field that belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember how you and I were riding together in chariots behind Ahab, his father, when the Lord made this prophecy about him? Yesterday I saw the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, and I will surely make you pay for it on this plot of ground. Now, then, pick him up and throw him on that plot of ground in accordance with the word of the Lord. Good full circle stuff there. 27. When Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw what had happened, he fled up the road to Beth-Hagan. Jehu chased him, shouting, "Kill him too!" They wounded him in his chariot on the way up to Gore, near Ibleam, and he escaped to Megiddo, and died there. His servants took him by a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him with his fathers in the tomb of the city of David. Parenthetically, in 11th year, Ahaziah had become king of Judah. Jezebel. I thought we were done with Jezebel, but now Jezebel is done with us. Verse 30. Then Jehu went to Jezreel. This is great final scene, like the last 5 minutes of the movie stuff. When Jezebel heard about it, she painted her eyes, arranged her hair, and looked out the window. So she knows what's coming, right? She dials herself up because she's going to go with dignity. There's nothing else. As Jehu entered the gate, she asked, "Have you come in peace, Zimri, you murderer of your master?" Now, I find it interesting that she calls him Zimri. If you remember back in 1 Kings, Zimri was an usurper. He was one of the ones who overthrew a king by murdering him. All right, that was way back. So she's like, good memory. He looked up at the window and called out, "Who is on my side?" Who? 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him. "Throw her down," Jehu said. So they tossed her out the window. They threw her down, and some of her blood spattered the wall and the horses as they trampled her underfoot. So they threw her out the window, basically. And, it's a fitting end. It's not a sympathetic character, so it's quite all right. And, I don't think any of the 4 of us will meet our end by being thrown out the window by a eunuch. It's unique. It would be incredibly ironic if that did happen, though. Like we were reading 1 Kings once late last year with my 7th graders, and we were reading Acts. We were reading the part where Philip translates Isaiah or explains Isaiah to the Ethiopian in the chariot, the famous passage in Acts, and it's an Ethiopian eunuch, right? And the kids were like, "What's a eunuch?" And I explained it to them, and it put them off their lunch a little. But they definitely learned something that day, because that's the kind of thing when an 11-year-old hears it, they don't forget.
Yeah, no. They'll remember that the rest of their lives.
Right.
34. Jehu went in.
Unicorns.
Indeed. Jehu went in and ate and drank. "Take care of that cursed woman," he said, "and bury her, for she was a king's daughter." But when they went out to bury her, they found nothing except her skull, her feet, and her hands. They went back and told Jehu, who said, "This is the word of the Lord. He had spoken through Elijah. On the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs will devour Jezebel's flesh. Jezebel's body will be like refuse on the ground in the plot of Jezreel, so that no one will be able to say, 'This is Jezebel.'" So she doesn't get buried. She's just a couple of pieces of bones left, and the dogs have taken everything else. Which, hardly worth putting makeup on for.
Yeah.
So now we get now Jehu goes on a little bit of a binge, right? He's like, going to consolidate power. That's what you got to do. He's like, he gets the shaded portion in the boxes I showed you earlier, because he's like doing stuff. He's doing stuff in the Lord's name, and he's getting rid of the prophets of Baal, and he's doing all these things that he should be doing. But not entirely coincidentally, he's also consolidating his own power. All right. In chapter 10. Now there were in Samaria 70 sons of the house of Ahab. That's what polygamy will get you. So Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the officials of Jezreel, to the elders, and to the guardians of Ahab's children. He said, as soon as this letter reaches you, since your master's sons are with you, and you have chariots and horses, a fortified city and weapons, choose the best and most worthy of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne. Then fight for your master's house. Basically, he's like giving them a chance, like fight for it if it's worth it to you. You know, I'm coming. But they were terrified and said, if 2 kings could not resist him, how can we? Verse 5. So the palace administrator, the city governors, the elders, the guardians sent this message to Jehu. We are your servants, and we will do anything you say. We will not appoint anyone as king. You do whatever you think is best. Then Jehu wrote to them a second letter, saying, if you are on my side and will obey me, take the heads of your master's sons and come to me in Jezreel by this time tomorrow. Lest you think he's being metaphorical. Now the royal princes, 70 of them, were with the leading men of the city, who were rearing them, which must mean we got children here. When the letter arrived, these men took the princes and slaughtered all 70 of them. They put their heads in baskets and sent them to and sent them to Jehu in Jezreel. So, like, it's the kind of gift you want to see when you establish your kingdom. 70 heads in baskets. When the messenger arrived, he told Jehu, they have brought the heads of the princes. It's kind of like maybe you didn't know what those were. Then Jehu ordered, put them in 2 piles at the entrance of the city gate until morning. That will make an impression. The next morning, Jehu went out. He stood before all the people and said, you are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him. But who killed all these? Brilliant little maneuver there. Who killed all these? I love it. Know then that not a word the Lord has spoken against the house of Ahab will fail. The Lord has done what he promised, though through his servant Elijah. So Jehu killed everyone in Jezreel who remained of the house of Ahab, as well as his chief men, his close friends, his priests, leaving him no survivor. 12. Jehu then set out and went toward Samaria. At Beth-eked of the shepherds, he met some relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and asked, who are you? They said, they should have said anything but what they said. They said, we are relatives of Ahaziah, and we have come down to greet the families of the king and of the queen mother. Yeah, they could have said anything else, really. Take them alive, he ordered. So they took them alive and slaughtered them by the well of Beth-eked, 42 men. He left no survivor. After he left there, he came upon Jehonadab, son of Rechab, who was on his way to meet him. Jehu greeted him and said, are you in accord with me, as I am with you? I am, Jehonadab said. If so, said Jehu, give me your hand. So he did. They shook on it. So he did, and Jehu helped him up into his chariot. Jehu said, come with me and see my zeal for the Lord. Then he had him ride along in his chariot. 17. When Jehu came to Samaria, he killed all who were left of Ahab's family. He destroyed them, according to the word of the Lord spoken to Elijah. So then Jehu, this is fantastic. Then Jehu brought all the people together and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little. I, Jehu, will serve him much. Now summon all the prophets of Baal, all his ministers and all his priests. See that no one is missing, because I am going to hold a great sacrifice for Baal. Anyone who fails to come will no longer live. Then it tells you, gives it away. But Jehu was acting deceptively in order to destroy the ministers of Baal. And I first read this, I thought, wow, how are they not tipped off that this was a trap? But then I considered, well, because like no matter what side, quote unquote, Jehu would have been on, the Lord's side or the side of the prophets of Baal, he probably would have consolidated his power in more or less the same way, right? So there's no dead giveaway there. All the people of Ahab's family he's killing, he would have, if he was going to follow in the ways of Baal, he would have killed them anyway.
Mhm.
Jehu said, verse 20, call an assembly in honor of Baal. So they proclaimed it. Then he sent word throughout Israel, and all the ministers of Baal came. Not one stayed away. They crowded into the temple of Baal until it was full from one end to the other. And Jehu said to the keeper of the wardrobe, bring robes for all the ministers of Baal. So he brought out robes for them. 23. Then Jehu and Jehonadab, son of Rechab, went into the temple of Baal. Jehu said to the ministers of Baal, look around and see that no servants of the Lord are here with you, only ministers of Baal. So they went in to make sacrifices and burnt offerings, or holocausts, as the Catholic Bible said. Now Jehu had posted 80 men outside with this warning. If one of you lets any of these men escape, I am placing, if one of you lets any of the men I am placing in your hands escape, it will be your life for his life. As soon as Jehu had finished making the burnt offering, he ordered the guards and officers, go in and kill them. Let no one escape. So they cut them down with the sword. The guards and officers threw the bodies out and then entered the inner shrine of the temple of Baal. They brought the sacred stone out of the temple of Baal and burned it. They demolished the sacred stone of Baal and tore down the temple of Baal, and the people have used it as a latrine to this day.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Well, public restrooms, I mean, are a really great idea, whether it's ancient Israel or modern Chicago. We could use more of that. So Jehoiada destroyed Baal worship in Israel. Good for him. However, he did, there's always going to be a however. However, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which had caused Israel to commit, specifically the worship of the golden calves. Remember those set up in Bethel in the south and Dan up in the north. The Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in accomplishing what is right in my eyes and have done to the house of Ahab all I had in mind to do, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the fourth generation. Not forever, but you get, four generations. It's pretty good. It's pretty good for what's going on here. Yeah. Jehu was not careful to keep the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam. 32. In those days, the Lord began to reduce the size of Israel. Hazael overpowered the Israelites throughout their territory east of the Jordan and all the land of Gilead. So the tribes that were to the east of Jordan, the half tribes, the two half tribe sons of Joseph, Gad, Reuben, and so they get eaten up by the Arameans. 34. As for the other events of Jehu's reign, all he did, all his achievements, they are written about in the annals of the kings of Israel. Jehu rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. Jehoahaz, his son, succeeded him as king. The time that Jehu reigned over Israel and Samaria was 28 years. So that brings us here. Perfectly timed. Is almost like I knew that was going to happen. Here. Go back to that real quick. Oh, sharing, share screen. That. All right. So we made our way through Ahaziah, through Jehoram, and there we have Jehu, who gets to be in light gray because he's one of the good ones, right? And he dies, and Jehoahaz there, son of Jehu, that's where we're up to there, and the kings of Israel on their left. And let's see, Ahaziah, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're hanging out down up in the north. And we begin readings next week with Athaliah. the only queen to rule over Judah. Just not very long, but it is interesting that there is one female leader that gets tossed in this chronology here. So that's where it picks up. And as you can see, though it seems like there's quite a few left, trust me, a lot of these on the left, they're going to go by pretty fast. As they both end up in captivity at the end. All right, stop share.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, as always.
Taking us through a complicated list of historical events and kings and such, and helping us keep it all straight.
Well, like I said, luckily, there's no other time when both the king of Judah and the king of Israel have the same name. We got past that portion. All right, so
Good.
that's good.
All right.
So I hope everyone has a fantastic week.
You too.
Stay away from open windows if there's a eunuch around.
Or at least ones that are, at the second floor or higher. I mean, yeah.
Indeed.
I was pushed out of a first floor window.
Yeah. As Benjamin Franklin once wisely said, always keep your eunuchs at ground level.
I'll have to Google that.
General.
All right. Well, have a good night. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, guys.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
See you Thursday.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.